Welcome to the Franchise Frontier, the podcast where we explore the evolving franchise landscape, dive into latest industry trends, and share actionable tools and tactics to help you build and grow your business.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Franchise Frontier podcast. Here we explore the world of business ownership, unlocking the keys to success while uncovering common pitfalls to avoid. Today, we're excited to welcome Josh Stewart. Josh is the owner of Mighty Dog Roofing of Bentonville, Arkansas. We're excited to have Josh on the show. We can't wait to dive in and listen to his insights. So let's get started. So, Josh, welcome. The first thing we kind of like to do is just understand you. Help us understand your journey into business ownership, a little background on yourself, and how you came to Mighty Dog Roofing.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. In terms of my background, I started off my career as a chemical engineer in the refining business. So worked along the Gulf Coast. Everybody's in oil and gas right down there. Did that for about 5 years and then really moved into more of an account management position. Really with the thought of, everyone who I think goes eventually into business ownership has some entrepreneurial bug, right? Even if they're in corporate America. So that was my soiree into, hey, I'd like to own a little bit of my business, even within my W-2 position. So that's the move to account management. Did that for a few years. Then transitioned over to the software as a service space. Again, more in the account management position. So kind of furthering my aspirations to, hey, I like managing my own book of business. I could see myself doing this long term in my own terms. And then kind of in parallel with the W-2, my wife and I began investing in real estate in about 2016. So that gave us a good glimpse into home services, managing projects, working with contractors, again, managing kind of customers, if you will, in terms of tenants and just working with folks and being really diligent on, managing P&L from a business perspective. And so that really got the wheels turning. It's like, hey, this is, we really enjoy this aspect of, real estate investing. It'd be great to leverage our skill set and what we've learned in our W-2s to pursue something, business for ourselves. So I initially, wanted to go down the route of purchasing an existing business, something that's up and running that I could really come in as an engineer and just kind of take ownership and optimize, right? But going down that route, I mean, there's a lot of pitfalls, and stepping into a really large capital outlay to purchase an existing business is also something that, coming into this stage is maybe not that appealing. And then finally going down the rabbit hole of purchasing a business, I met with a franchise coach, if you will, brokerage, basically will, highlight different franchise business opportunities, meet with those companies to see what aligns with your skill set and culture. And so went down that route. I did know from the start that I wanted to do something home services, just again, leaning kind of on my real estate background. Went through a plumbing company, a HVAC company, and then, interviewed with Horsepower and a couple different brands within Horsepower. Really aligned with the vision that the leadership team had, the culture that they're creating. I also felt that the, intellectual capital of that group was, very, very impressive. So which, led me down, okay, I think this is the franchisor I'd like to go with, let's select a brand. And really for my wife and I personally, it was, I want to pick something that is a need-based product and service versus more of a want-based. And Mighty Dog Roofing, being a need-based product, also helped that they had, several years under their belt, whereas some of the other horsepower brands were a little bit, more in the startup phase. So good data to go off of. And really just, that's how we ended up kind of pursuing Mighty Dog.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Especially with your background, was there If you look back into your business and when you were still a W-2 employee, etc., was there any certain thing that inspired you to become a business owner, or let's say gave you that push?
Yeah, I think it was, being able to own the decision making and being able to own the opportunity to drive revenue. I think that's what always was exciting. And you got a little bit of that on the account management side. There's, your sales and post sales in that position. So you're accelerating and trying to capture new business, and then you're managing a book at the back end. So I think it's the chase, and I think it's providing the good customer service on the back end that was like, this would be a fun venture, moving forward. And I think part of the reason too that, business ownership, and I think a lot of folks that go down this rabbit hole are looking for is, they want something more. They want something better than where they're currently at. And that's the drive for my wife and I is like, hey, we want to build something, outside of our W-2 and have buy a little bit more freedom and time back. And seeing the upside potential in what we've done with real estate is, that it can easily transfer over to business ownership. And so that was again, the drive to, hey, let's try to start and do something on our own.
Yeah, do you feel like, whether it be you or your wife, is there any person or anybody in your life as you when you were younger that kinda also had that entrepreneurial spirit that might have, that you kinda saw growing up that kinda maybe helped you feel as if you could really sink your teeth into it?
Yeah, I think I've had several mentors, in my life or folks that I've, come across and listened to their story. And a lot of those are entrepreneurial, right? They're doing things on their own. They're kind of setting the trends and continually looking for the next challenge. And it's easy for my personality to align with that. It's tough for me to just sit and clock in, right, and just kind of do the same day to day. I think it was underwhelming, is how I would phrase it. And so, looking for something that can really test my abilities, and this certainly has, the first year. So I think that's another thing that we were just chasing was what's the next challenge.
Yeah, speaking of that first year, can you walk us through a little bit about your first year as business ownership? What would you say were, some of the biggest surprises?
Yeah. So I think we knew going into it is like, hey, starting up a business is tough. Yeah, we're part of a franchise system that, is going to get your feet wet and get the ball rolling, right? But you're a startup business in a community that doesn't know you. So it's all about, lead gen, brand recognition. So we knew those were the two big hurdles, once we launched that we've really got to get ourselves footholded in the community and get that ball rolling. Um, so we knew it was going to be tough. We knew it was going to be a grind. It's like, hey, let's really put our head down for the next 1 to 2 years and get through that initial startup phase and kind of build something that's going to scale efficiently. But in terms of surprises, year one, obviously we're going through surprises on builds where we haven't installed a specific trade or we're running into a nuanced issue on production. Those I think are just kind of assumed you're going to run into those and, get your teeth kicked in a couple times and just learn it as you go, right? Kind of leaning in on the subcontractors to be that kind of product knowledge expert, install expert. Um, but I think one of the big surprises that I don't even know if I can call it a surprise. I should have expected this, but the wins and the losses that you have in your first year as the business owner, I mean, they hit hard, right? You can have wins or losses at a W-2 job, and yeah, maybe it's impactful to you, but it's very impactful. We know that you're the owner of the business, and you've got to really have a difficult conversation with someone, or make a decision that really impacts you both financially and personally, and your team. It just hits different.
Yeah, you touch on a good point there too. When it comes to that first year, and going through the things that you don't know what you don't know. Just talk a little bit about how you have the ability to lean in on not only the franchisor and their knowledge, but also your subcontractors.
Yeah, yeah. I will say one great thing that being a part of a franchise system gives you is resources, right? You've got a ton of resources throughout the brand in terms of learning material. You've got a dedicated coach, both on the business side. You got some folks on the marketing side as well that can help guide you in that direction. But then also one other big benefit is the partnerships that are created at the franchisor level. So starting out, I really leaned on my distributor to be a point of contact and a local mentor because they've been in the roofing game. They understand siding and windows, right? So leading on them from a local level to not only bounce questions off if we get into a situation where, myself or my team haven't encountered this particular problem, but also leaning on them to recommend subcontractors for us to work with who have a proven track record of doing quality work, um, and just kind of shadowing the guys in the field, right? I did that for probably the first year, continue to do it on new trades, as absorbing as much information and knowledge on the product and install from the guys who've been doing it for 30 plus years, which are, our crews, right? That's been a big one for me. It's just, trying to lean in and understand that I have resources at my fingertips and being able to leverage the right resource at the right time.
Yeah, I believe there's a lot to be said for leaning in and finding good crews from your distributor that have been working with those guys. But to your point, there's no better tip or trick or understanding of product than you get from the guys that are doing it on a day to day. Even if they tell you, when it comes to things like estimating stuff, they'll tell you, hey, you always got to estimate this like this because of that, right? Those type of things that you just really wouldn't know, and until you're in that space, it's good to have not only the franchisor but those subcontractors to kind of lean in, and your distributor to kind of lean into it and kind of go through that. So, you talked a little bit about um, the biggest surprise, and I think you've touched on it just a little bit, but is there one thing that you thought was like the biggest challenge in that first year?
Yeah. This is one. And if you ask my team, I think we touch on this topic once a week, if not more, but it's all around setting proper expectations. You go into business ownership, you're selling a project, a roof. You have this maybe predetermined understanding that everyone involved in that transaction really has a good expectation as to how the process is going to go. Um, but that's where, if we're running into hurdles or issues with a sub or with a customer or with any other, bottleneck that we come across, it all circles back to like, hey, I don't think we really set proper expectations. And so that was a big one for me. It shouldn't really be a surprise, I think, going into something new, but just having a really good foundation. And because we are part of a brand that we're trying to deliver a really premium product, a really premium service. And so just being really transparent with the customer around, hey, this is exactly how it's going to go. I don't want you guys to have any surprises. Let's talk through everything and be super transparent. We're now evolving because we've done a lot of trades and jobs. We've got some experience under our belt. Is how do we implement better expectation setting in every aspect of our business?
Yeah, when you make a good point there, because oftentimes as we've grown up or lived our adult lives and started to deal with home ownership ourselves and are dealing with pest control, roofing, whatever it might be, oftentimes we don't understand, like, why, when I'm given a time to be somewhere, do they give me between 7 and 5? It doesn't make sense to me. And then when you get into the space, you realize there's so much going on. There's so many moving parts that it's not always done because in a negligent manner, right? It's done because sometimes things come up. And so I think that there's a lot to be said for, again, really establishing your process and your expectations with the team, and then being able to apply that to the customer journey so that the customer feels very, very good about, the way things are going, and not as if they're behind, or even if it is behind, they understand why, they understand what's going on. They really feel like they're in the loop, even though they're not having to do the service.
100%.
So describe a little bit now for you, like, what's a typical day in the life for you?
Yeah, it's still, day to day is different, right? What keeps it exciting. I'm still very much involved in the day to day operation. One goal I have for myself this year is just being able to, let's start working more on the business, less in the business, and what can we automate and delegate from my, list of roles and responsibilities. But one day I'm still going out and checking jobs. I'm going out and climbing roofs and helping with inspections. So meeting with customers in the field, doing inspections, chatting with crews, and then the next day I've got to put my marketing hat on, right, and really review our marketing performance. Maybe when we want to test another, lead gen source in our area and really pursue that. Um, and then you get to, as an engineer, I really enjoy numbers and kind of data analytics. So then I get to, pop into that and, let's review P&L and make sure, margin analysis on our jobs and, review estimates and make sure everything looks accordingly that way. So it's definitely fluent. It's something I'm working on to make sure that I've got a, predetermined schedule for the week and stick to that schedule so I can knock out all of my to-dos. But, yeah, still very dynamic, working towards, again, putting processes and people in place that I can back out a little bit, but we're still in year 2. So I think it's still very critical for me to definitely have a good pulse day to day of
Yeah,
what's going on.
and if you don't mind, talk a little bit about how you started out. What I mean by that is what did the team build out look like from where you started to where you are, and how did you mold that? I know oftentimes you think of these roles that you will need to run this business. But then oftentimes it really has to do with where do we all settle, right? I use the plane method. Like maybe I'm the 50,000 foot person and I need a 40,000 foot person and I need a 30,000. And I think that oftentimes when we think about those jobs, we think, oh, I want the person that, is the most knowledgeable about the most things. But oftentimes you find out, well, I'm the 50,000 foot person and so is this person. So how did you find that? How did you find that team and how have you built that out to where you are now?
Yeah. So when we launched, I still had my W-2 role. So my goal there was to put a team in place to manage the sales pipeline, manage the sales process, manage the closing. And my alignment was, hey, I'm going to play general manager, help with the production, scheduling, ordering materials, P&L on the back end. We operated with a sales manager and a sales rep for about the first 6 months. We launched in late September of 24. So going into Q4, we are in an area with colder weather. So the volume of leads were a bit slow when we launched, which gave us time to really, understand the business and understand kind of the marketing challenges and find the crews. So that may have been a blessing in disguise. We were a bit slow to start, but I held my W-2 until around April of that next year, and then decided like, hey, we're getting busy. We had a couple storms roll in, the volume's starting to pick up. There's a lot I could be doing to help our company scale if I'm dedicated 100%. So my wife and I made the decision I'm going to step away from my corporate role and kind of focus 100% in. So I stepped in as more of the day to day, helping on both the sales and the production side. Uh, we ran with myself, a sales manager, and a sales rep for probably another couple months. And then we hired a few more reps as the volume of leads grew and as our, just demand of services grew. Um, and then we had some turnover, as most folks do. So the sales turnover, we did have quite a few folks turnover from the rep side, turnover from the sales manager position side. And really, since the summer, we have been running with myself kind of leading both the sales and production teams. And then I've got 2 sales reps. One has been recently converted to more of a project manager hybrid sales role, which I think really, to your point, Dave, is understanding the skill sets and strengths that your team has and really being able to align them with a position that makes sense. He's really blossomed into working with the crews. He's got some construction background, so the project management role really, really fit him well. And then my other rep, again, is more or less my lead sales rep, right? That I'm really, reliant on closing business and doing a good job of that.
Yeah, that's excellent. Talk quickly about the way the business felt for you and maybe your wife in the differentiation between you doing it as the general manager with still keeping your W-2 versus deciding, okay, we're going all in. Did you How did you feel in terms of difference? Did it feel like you were pedaling uphill when you were having your W-2 and you started to get more on a little bit more flat ground going as you went all in? Just talk about that as somebody who might be watching this podcast. We talk about it a lot where, if you're going to do it, you got to find a way to go all in. And I think that there's a different build out for everybody and everybody can do it structurally different. But since you've kind of seen it from both sides of it, I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on how it felt to you, if there was a differentiation for when you were all in, how things started to flow.
Yeah. So I think, when we launched, having the mindset that I'm going to keep my corporate role, and really the goal was I'm going to keep my corporate role until the point where our business is up and running, scaled, and it can allow me to step in from a financial perspective. But, that shifts when you're in the business, but you're not all the way into the business. And I felt like I didn't have a great pulse on exactly what's going on, what improvements can we make, because I'm kind of half foot in my corporate role, half foot in Mighty Dog. And, it just came down to the point, it's like, hey, we've invested our time and money into building this business. Like, are we going to go all in or not? Because I really feel that if we continue on this trajectory, one, we're not going to hit our projections that we have for year 1 and 2. I just don't see that happening. And two, I just think that we're gonna scale that much faster if we're all in. And so the mindset shift really happened there. Is like, hey, let's go all in. Brittany still has her W-2, so from a financial standpoint, we were kind of covered there. But it's like, hey, let's give this thing a real shot and see how quickly we can make it grow. And so that was the big driver for me. And like from a mindset shift, once we did kind of put in the 2 weeks for the W-2 and really step away, I mean, it was difficult to do, right? I mean, my wife and I are young. We have a daughter in kindergarten, so it's it was a difficult decision. But it's also like, hey, we go back to our why. Why did we do this thing? What are we trying to build here? And is this the right decision? And I think it was. And I think once I stepped into that role 100%, it's like, okay, this is real. We're going to make this happen. There's no way failure is an option. We're going to do what we need to do to get this thing up and going.
And then from an internal part, now that you're part of the business full on, did it feel like things started to kind of scale quicker as you were kind of understanding all parts of the business, where you were deficient, where it needed to be better, how you could be better as a business owner and a team player? How did that feel in terms of internally inside the business?
100% felt that, as soon as I stepped in, you're just able to see what's a little bit more granular, what's going on day to day, coaching moments, capturing details or lost opportunities that were, just slipped through our hands. A lot of those began to be illuminated. And it's like, the lead flow got better, the closing rate got better, the production side got better. It was just more like we're operating with a purpose versus, kind of the Wild West was, when we started. So I do feel that, me stepping in was definitely the right move. It's just, how quickly can we get to where we want to be?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've been on a few of these podcasts too, where I've heard other people say the same thing, where they, even in that seat, maybe not keeping their W-2, but um, they had tried to run the business sort of from a desk per se, right? And they kind of felt as if it really wasn't running well. But once they got their feet in the mud, as this person said, things really started to take off. And I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, I talked to Wyatt the other day about some things about his job, and he said, I just gave up everything to know the business. And once you can do that, I think for you being an entrepreneur and obviously a, a good business person, you're able to put those puzzle pieces in to where, when you're still working a W-2, it's hard to realize, like, does that puzzle piece need to just turn or is it the wrong piece? Right. And being able to do those things is kind of um, the best part about going all in and doing those kind of things. So hats off to you for that. When you talk about that business, now you're in the business, you're on the grind. You know, what are some parts of the job that you find the most rewarding?
Yeah. I mean, the big one for me is like, hey, let's come into a project where a customer is in a need situation, right? They're needing to get a replacement due to damage, or they're needing to get it due to age, or maybe it's a want and they're just wanting to upgrade their home. I think the biggest reward for me is, can we one provide a really stellar customer experience? It all comes back to that. Like, let's set good expectations. I think throughout the industry and probably everyone listening to this, right? They've had some bad experience with a contractor. And that's what really drove me to want to get into this business is like, hey, how can I take my, business background and make a really stellar customer experience all the way throughout the customer journey? So it's really when we have a plan and executing the customer journey properly and, you know, having customers give us feedback like, hey, this was a really easy process. You guys answered all of our questions. You guys have been super helpful. The install went exactly as we expected. You guys were clean, timely. I had other companies tell us they were 2 or 3 months out. You guys did it in a week. Just hearing that sort of feedback is really uplifting. And I think it gives our team a sense of pride that, like, hey, we're facing challenges along the way, but we're also facing some wins, right? And there's definitely some times where like a lot of things have fallen our way and the project went smoothly. And, everybody kind of, gets a win and a smile at the end. So that's the one where I think is still to this day, like if a project goes really smoothly, customer's super happy, that's a big win.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's also very interesting, and I know that in your research of looking at business ownership, you definitely heard this, but I still go back to the fact that everybody would still say that roofers are the least trusted home service business there is, right? And so when you think about all of our Mighty Dog locations and those things, even like yourself, you think about that and you realize quickly that a lot of it has to do with transparency, customer journey, and just being, as open and honest as you can be. I think that um, I did another episode where somebody made a comment where they said, oftentimes your best reviews come from a mistake. But if you're willing to stand up for that mistake and say, hey, I know that this mistake was made, here's how we're going to correct it. And you do that because the assumption is that you're not going to take ownership of it. You're going to pawn it off, and it's you're going to find a way to shortcut or those type of things in the home service space. So, you know, that customer journey and the expectation thing that you're setting for yourself even for the next year, I think is always a good place to live. Right? I think to your point that you made earlier about getting into your community and having people know you, right? Being known for a good customer journey or a good product or being transparent, no one goes outside and says, you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to change my roof. No one says that, right?
Right.
It's when that happens, you know, how do you ease the customer's mind? And you do that by being transparent and executing on what you said. So, again, hats off to you guys for being able to do that. And it is a good feeling, and it's a good idea to have your business built on that. And I think that, how do you as the business owner communicate that internally to yourselves about the ultimate goal is the customer journey?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And, what we try to do is, weekly we're meeting Mondays and Fridays as a team, right? And kind of reviewing the schedule ahead and then reviewing how it went on Fridays, right? So I think what we've incorporated here in the past few months is let's take a look back at jobs that went really well. Why did they go well? How can we repeat that process, right? How can we systematize it? And alternatively, why did things not go so well? What can we do to prevent that? And how are we setting ourselves up for success in the future from maybe it's a coaching perspective, maybe it's a miscommunication with a sub, just trying to identify areas in which we can eliminate that risk going forward and scale. Definitely an internal conversation that we're continuing to have and just learn and build as a team.
Totally understand. I think having that conversation is probably, step one, right? Of that continuing to do that. When you talked about the most rewarding, is there one certain thing that kind of keeps you on your toes oftentimes when it comes to jobs?
Yeah, it's just the unknown, right? I think this is construction. This is major construction. We try to set that expectation as like, hey, roofing is a pretty dirty major project that you're undergoing on your home. There could be stuff that comes up that we're unable to identify in the inspection process, and just making sure we're setting that foundation so that when we rip the roof off, and guess what, there's decking that needs to be replaced, or the chimney flashing is shot and we need to redo that. When we go back to the homeowner and prove with pictures like, hey, just letting you know, we ripped this off. We would recommend to replace this decking. Then we go back, it has a really pristine product. It's not a surprise. Like, we've set the expectation, but I think that's always the big unknown when we're going into a trade that maybe we have only executed a couple times. Is like, what are we not accounting for here? What are we going to find? But I think as we continue to grow and build confidence with our crews and with our trades and understanding, hey, here's the risk that we think we see, we're trying to mitigate that on the front end and set expectations, and we're just able to execute from there.
And so if we now that we turn the page a little bit and switched ourselves to, you're talking to someone who's thinking about purchasing a business or aspiring to be a business owner, what advice would you give to someone considering becoming a business owner?
Yeah, I think I would say first and foremost that if you're looking for easy, don't do it. This is a challenge. I think it's a rewarding challenge that I've kind of chatted through a couple items here, but it's a grit, right? It's like this is a startup company. Even though you're part of a franchise organization that's giving you playbooks, is you've got to build your own way. Like, what works in some markets doesn't work in other markets, and you still get to be very much an entrepreneur in this seat. And so just having that grit, having that kind of motivation to overcome challenges, like, that's going to be a big one. So uh, if you're looking for a passive investment, I would say stick to the stock market. Maybe you can look at real estate, but yeah, business ownership is definitely something you got to be all in.
And I know you had discussed a little bit earlier that in the beginning you were looking for something that was a pre-existing business. Were there any things going through that process, that you would tell somebody, hey, if you're looking for a pre-existing business, make sure that you're highlighting these things that I happen to look at, which led me to a franchise.
Yeah, I think it's really doing a deep dive on their P&Ls, right? And understanding, what does their actual profit and loss look like over the past 3, 5 years, whatever data they have. And I think it's also getting in with the owners and the employees of that organization who you'd be working with on a day to day, and understanding, are they aligned with your culture? Do they, are these folks that you feel like you could work with? And just doing as much due diligence, maybe with competitors in the market, do the numbers make sense? What risk or hurdles do you anticipate I'd be ready for? Just as much research, I think, as you can do on the front end.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There's a really big part of that, all the P&Ls and all those kind of things. And one of the biggest points that I always bring up is that culture piece. Stepping into some place that's been established and doing a great job, if it's not a culture fit, you're not just going to walk into a business and say, okay, we're changing everything because this is the way I see it fit. So it's not always an easy transition, but I think you touch on a good point about understanding the culture fit as well. So, if you were kind of trying to dial it down a little bit, is there a essential skill you think somebody should have for running a successful business?
Uh, yeah, for this first year for me, I think it's grit. I mean, I think it's going in, just knowing it's going to be tough, but there's a light on the other side, and just be able to push through that. The other thing that we touched on, I think, is just knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and being able to be resourceful, right? Leaning on people when you're in an area where, hey, this isn't my strength. I understand and acknowledge that, and being able to either hire or, receive coaching or mentorship from someone who does have that strength. I think that's another just ability that, you know, building a really successful business, it takes a team. It's very tough to do just by yourself. So, how do you surround yourself with folks who are going to help make you successful?
And so, I know, like you said, it's you've had a little bit of your W-2, you've leaned in, you've had some success. If you could pause time and go back and start over, is there anything you would do differently to prepare for business ownership?
That's a good one. I don't think so, and I'll kind of answer that with a caveat in that I think a lot of us can really just grind on the numbers and do research for years, and you can continue trying to learn what the risks are. But I think part of being an entrepreneur and part of being a business owner is being able to make a decision in a timely fashion. And if it doesn't go in your way, being able to pivot, right? And being able to pivot quickly. So I think you can do paralysis by analysis and really look into this thing for a while, but it's jumping into it and figuring it out and just being able to feel comfortable with the uncomfortable, just knowing that situations are going to arise and leaning on your skill set or the skill set of those that you have around you to make it through. I think that's the big thing, right? It's just knowing you're going to learn some hard lessons going into year one, but fighting through those.
Yeah, understanding that you're gonna make mistakes, but also understanding you're gonna have to develop the ability to hypercorrect to make things go the right way. And again, if you're learning lessons that are making you better in the long run, those are all, there's nothing wrong with that. So I think that that's again a testament to that. Is there one lesson in the last couple years? Is there one lesson or mistake from your experience that you've had that every business owner should hear? You probably have a little bit of a giggle about it now, but in the when it happened, it probably felt terrible.
Yeah, I've touched on it a couple of times, but it's expectation setting. Like you think it's just the most, understood thing, but the littlest detail, if you're expecting the project to go one way and the customer is expecting the project to go a different way and you guys aren't aligned, you're going to have a crossroads at some point. So I think it's just, man, just saying the one little thing, detailing the procedure to them a little bit better. It's easy to do and skip over in the moment, but it does make the difference. And I think I can point back to every issue that we've had. It's just we didn't set the right expectation. So it's like, how can we improve on that?
Yeah, and do you think that with that being such a staple for you now, do you feel that as a team you have to conversate a lot about, listen, we can't assume that the homeowner knows anything, and so we have to, even if it seems very basic, like you would know this is a possibility, we're going to detail every single thing out. It sounds like you might have had a few of those in the last first couple of years where, there was probably some things that you in your brain, even as you're learning roofing, you're going, I would have imagined they would know that this might happen. But again, to your point, if they're upset about it or they didn't understand it, then we didn't explain it to them correctly. So as you think about that internally, are you going to a process now where it's like, we're going to explain it to the T? If they don't understand it, or if they do understand it already and they want to say, yeah, I knew that, that's fine, but it doesn't mean we're not going to cover it.
Yeah, 100%. That's what we're doing. And it's now being incorporated into our sales process and then our pre-build checklist, if you will. It's just really walking through, this is exactly what's going to happen. These are the products you're choosing. And again, just setting the expectation. I think if you look at a lot of the, bigger name successful companies across the home services or tech or what have you, they do a good job of what you're getting when you sign up for that product or service. And so how can we replicate that in our local market with our local products? And so as much conversation over communication of how things are going to go, putting it in writing, putting it, again in the conversation, just making sure we're being as detailed as possible and not assuming that folks on the other side have been through this before or understand the process. I mean, one big one that we face in the roofing industry is insurance claims, right? And it's very easy to maybe make an assumption that the homeowner understands what that process looks like, but by and large, people don't, right? And like even folks in our industry, I don't think have a really good grasp on it. So being as communicative and as taking a consultative approach to each of those conversations, I think we're just getting better over time. We're incorporating more dialogue into our talk track, and we're able to kind of make sure that every detail or every situation has been addressed and kind of going from there.
Yeah, you touch on a good point, and I think it's really important, especially if it's a detail that you're in charge of. What I mean by that is, you go back to the insurance parts of roofing, and there's a good portion of it that really is out of your control and out of your hand. And so, but it's important that hey, I'm going to be communicating X, Y, and Z. This is our role, but it's also nice to be able to give the homeowner some suggestions of things that you should probably talk about this, or you probably should understand that. And I know as a sales process, it probably doesn't feel great sometimes when you're, yeah, 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 when you're shunned away. But at the same time, especially, with things like Rilla and those things that people are using now, and notes and those type of things, to be able to say like, hey, we've discussed this, and you were present when we discussed this, and it's okay that you forgot about it, but I just want to make sure that you understand, like, we did talk about this thing might happen. And so, there's a lot to be said for controlling what you can control, and really over communicating things. Because to your point, I would imagine at the end of the job, the customer feels a lot better about the job when things were over communicated, and then it all comes to fruition, and it's like they can say, this is exactly what you told me.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think another takeaway that for me, if I'm putting myself in the homeowner's shoes is I want to learn something from this process. Maybe I haven't had my roof installed in the past, and now I fully understand it for the next time I have to go through it. Or, same thing on the insurance claim process. Like, not, it's a little bit of a black box to I think a lot of people, and just illuminating that and walking through how, what the itemized estimate looks like, and explaining what recoverable depreciation is, just having some takeaway that they can, have as a valued lesson learned, I think is another thing where I think when they look at us, as a partner in their community, is like, these guys not only executed the project, but they were able to really explain how things were going to happen and what was going on. Whereas, my experience with other contractors in the past, they just came and, installed my roof and didn't really explain much.
Yeah, it sounds like you're taking a really a different path, because not only are you going to be able to execute on the project, but you're also going to be able to educate as you go through that process. And let's be honest, like, oftentimes, whether it be health insurance or home insurance or car insurance, most times when those things come up, what has happened? Something that isn't very comfortable, whether it be an accident or a broken bone or whatever it might be. And so, yeah, we're all guilty of not really, really, really diving into the fine print of each one of those policies, thinking that hopefully it doesn't happen to me. And when it does, the stress level is already at a 10 because of said thing, right? A storm, a car accident, whatever it might be. And so having somebody like you, or like a good doctor, that can come in and not only say, hey, you're going to be okay, or this roof is going to be okay, and here's why, and here's how we're going to get there, I think really brings everyone's anxiety down. And you feel as if you have a partner in this that's not just installing the roof. I'm going to install the roof, but I'm also want you to know this is why we're doing it, and this is how we're going to do it to help you long term.
Exactly.
So what's next for you, right? If you think about your business, been going for 2 years, I know you're setting goals and expectations. What is the next scale for you? What is something that you're trying to do, possibly in 26? Is it, is the long? I'll just talk about that specifically. What are some goals that you have for yourself and your business in 26?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of touched on, we've got our feet wet with a lot of trades. We've got some really good crews now that we've circled through and experimented with, and I think our processes are getting to the point where it's like, okay, we're a functioning company, we're a functioning business. Let's optimize and let's scale. So I think that's really the strategy for year two: is how do we continually to grow at a rate that is reasonable, but we have projections we're trying to hit, right? So it's about scaling efficiently, not growing too fast, but obviously having some challenges and goals ahead of us. But two, it's, how do we become a little bit more efficient in the way we're doing things, and really focusing on profitability as we scale. I've chatted with a lot of other owners and, similar industries or businesses, and there's really two directions. You can really focus on profitability to start, or you can focus on revenue and growth to start. And we're trying to do somewhat of a combo of both. Is like, hey, we're pushing revenue, we're pushing scale, but let's make sure that we're a profitable company, because cash flow is king in a small business, and just really making sure that we're managing that. And so that's really the goal. I think we've got some headcount that we're going to definitely add to our team. We're thinking a little bit more outside the box on, other avenues for lead gen. What can we leverage within our market to have more share of, networking referral opportunities? So those are goals that we have for 2026. Um, and again, it's just executing better, right? Like we've done decent, and year one, how can we improve upon the timeline or product or service that we're delivering?
Yeah, and I know in the franchise space, obviously there's a couple different ways to scale, right? There's people that buy more territory, they buy more vehicles or whatever. But then to your point, there's also the way of how do I scale by just perfecting your current operation, right? Making it more efficient, making sure that you are more profitable because a job that took you maybe 2 days now takes you 1 day or whatever it might be, understanding the pitfalls of that. So again, excited to see that. For you, how do you see your role as the business owner evolving as the industry changes a little bit, or has your seat, like you mentioned, you've wanted to lean more on working on the business as opposed to in the business. So in 26, how do you kind of see that working for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, last year I wanted to get my hands on every part of the business, right? I think for the first 6 months, I'm running around picking up materials for the guys, boxing nails here and there. I'm climbing on the roof. I'm doing everything. I really wanted to have a really good understanding of, when I have a team in place, this is kind of the expectations that I can set with them and help coach, because I've done it before, right? Um, so now, to the point where, you know, I chat with my guys about this, fairly often, is what can you be doing right now to have the highest return on your dollar per hour activity? And so from a sales perspective, it's building pipe, right? It's following up with prospects. Um, and then for myself, I'll ask myself the same question: is what I'm doing right now the highest return on investment for my business? And I've actually, over the holidays, created a list of, like, hey, here's where I'm spending my time. That's not a big return. It's required, right, to continue to run the business, but how can I automate or delegate some of those responsibilities so that I can then focus on the high dollar per hour activities, in terms of scaling lead gen or scaling, pipe on the front end? So that's where my head's going, and just trying to pick off, like, the low hanging fruits of those, and get those off my plate, and really focus on how I think that my impact can help grow the business.
Yeah, when I used to coach, we used to talk about we want to win every day, right? We want to win in every drill or whatever that might be. And and it's fun, but it's like you said, win stands for what's important now. Like what's important right now that's going to help our business. So it's how do I win in this moment? How do I win in this day? How do we win in this week? Like what's important now? So I think that'll be great for you in 26, and I'm excited about that. When you talk about somebody who's listening right now, who's maybe on the edge of launching into this dream, what would your message be to them?
Yeah, I'd say this is a great roofing is a great product, great industry to be in. I think we touched on it, that there is a stigma in the roofing industry that's negative, right? And I think it's not easy, right? But it's an area where you can come in and provide a really great customer experience, and you can differentiate yourselves amongst your competitors. So I think it's a great industry. I think Horsepower and Mighty Dog as a whole has really allowed me to, one, lean on the resources that they have, but also, like I mentioned in the past, be an entrepreneur, right? Like, create my own internal processes that are going to help my business grow in the way that I see fit, versus, I'm sure there's other franchise organizations where you just walk in and they've got a playbook for every single thing and you're just trying to execute. definitely much more leeway in this brand and in this franchisor that like, hey, you can kind of write your own path. They're going to guide you, but like you're the one steering the ship.
Yeah, that's great. There's a thing I like to do, a little football moniker here. We call it three and out. So I give you just three random questions just about you, just to kind of give you an idea of some things about yourself. So, number one, what's your go-to thing to unwind after a crazy day?
Yeah, we talked about it before we hit record, but we're in Bentonville, Arkansas, and there's a ton of mountain biking trails that the Waltons have poured into it. So I'm a huge mountain biker. I like to get out and be on the trail and just stop thinking about stuff for a little bit. So that's the big one is trying to take your head away from it and just getting a little bit of cardio and exercise in.
Absolutely. Number two, is it coffee, tea, or energy drink for you?
Coffee. I think my younger guys on the team have got me on the energy drinks a little bit, so we'll sprinkle those in, but by and large, coffee.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm a white Monster energy drink guy. I don't know why I can't get over it. I buy it at Costco. It's a waste of time and money, but I have to have it. And last question, and probably the best one. One piece of advice you would give your 25-year-old self.
Yeah, I think if I can go back and just give myself something where I'm at today is like, hey, you don't really know where you're going to be in 3, 5, 10 years. I think it's like taking the leap of faith, do your due diligence, don't analyze until you can't do anything, make a decision, execute, and just kind of trust your ability. And I think the folks that really start young and are aggressive, those are the ones that come out on top and they really achieve what they're looking for.
It's awesome. Well, Josh, thank you so much for being on the show, and everybody listening. Thanks for joining us on the Franchise Frontier podcast. I hope today's episode gave you a clearer look into the journey of business ownership. And if business ownership's calling your name, don't ignore it. The playbook's out there. The question is, are you ready to run it? Remember, like, subscribe, and we're looking forward to seeing you on our next episode.